The gravity hit me the moment I stepped off the transport dock, not the station's gravity that was set to a tolerable 1.1 standard. What hit me was the weight of every eye in that arrival corridor turning toward me and then almost immediately turning away. That dismissal was its own kind of gravity. You felt it in your chest. My name is Kaido Shan. I am 31 years old. I stand 1m78. I weigh 78 kg. I have no armor plating, no venom glands, no secondary eyelids, no echolocation organs, and my vision covers a disappointingly narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum on the conclave station Verithal, orbiting the neutron star designated HR 7219 by human astronomers and called the Wound. By everyone else, I was the smallest, softest, shortest-lived person in any room I walked into. I had known this going in. My briefing documents had been very clear about it. Earth's diplomatic corps had given me 6 weeks of preparation, 3 cultural immersion modules, 1 very thorough medical scan, and a handshake from the Deputy Secretary of Interstellar Affairs, who had looked at me the way people look at someone they are fairly sure they will never see again. That had been 4 months ago. Now I was here, badge on my chest, reading human diplomatic attach, Kaido Shun in 7 languages, and the corridor of Verithal was moving around me like river moves around a pebble. Bodies, wide bodies, armored bodies, bodies that moved on 6 limbs or 4. Something that was technically neither. The air smelled of ammonia and something sweet underneath it, like burnt sugar left too long on the stove. The ceiling was 4 m above my head, and the hallway was still crowded. A Vethroni soldier stepped past me, and the air pressure from his movement alone pushed me sideways half a step. He did not look down. He did not look at me at all. I was not worth the rotation of his neck. I straightened my jacket and kept walking. My liaison met me at the junction of Corridor 7 in the diplomatic ring. Her name was Sarah, and she was Keth, which meant she stood 2 m tall on 4 articulated limbs, had a thorax the color of dark amber, and communicated through a harmonic resonator in her upper chest that her translation collar converted into something approximating a human voice. The voice it produced was calm and slightly formal, the way a patient teacher sounds when they are explaining something for the 3rd time at a show. Shannon, she said, your quarters are prepared. The preliminary session begins in 4 hours. You're not expected to speak. Good morning to you too, I said. She tilted her head in a way that I had learned from the briefing documents meant polite confusion is not morning on this station. The station operates on a 31-hour cycle. Aligned with it is an expression. I said, it means hello. She filed this away. Hello. We walked together through the diplomatic ring, and she briefed me on the session agenda the way a doctor briefs a patient on a procedure. Technically complete, emotionally sparse. The Galactic Conclave's 340th session would open with the Keth Dominion presenting trade amendments, followed by the Vethroni block's motion on territorial buffer zones, followed by a review of new member classifications. This last item was the one that mattered to me, to Earth, to every human being alive. Motion on the table had been filed by Commander Devash of the Vethroni Council 7 weeks ago. It was worded carefully, diplomatically, in a language of concern and protection. What it meant, stripped of all that careful language, was this: humanity should be reclassified from full member status to protected ward Status, we would lose our vote, we would lose our seat at the primary diplomatic tier, we would be catalogued alongside pre-spaceflight civilizations that the conclave monitored but did not consult. Devash's argument was straightforward. Humans were too new, too fragile, too short-lived, too biologically unstable to participate meaningfully in decisions that would shape the next several centuries of interstellar policy. Our oldest individual had lived 119 years. Our bodies could be killed by microscopic organisms. We had no natural weapons. Our bones broke, our skin tore. We required specific atmospheric compositions and temperature ranges, or we simply stopped functioning. He was not wrong about any of those facts. He was, I believed, wrong about what they meant, but that argument was for the session floor, and I was not expected to speak there. I was here to observe, to report, and to make sure Earth had accurate information about what was being decided in its name. The actual advocacy work was handled by Ambassador Finley, who was already on station and was by all accounts doing her best. Against considerable odds, Sarah led me through the diplomatic ring to the observation gallery that had been assigned to the human delegation. It was a small room with a curved window overlooking the main floor below. I could see the tiered seating of the conclave already filling up, delegate after delegate taking their places, the air below shimmering with the combined translation fields of 43 species trying to understand one another. I pressed my forehead against the glass and looked down. That was when I saw the Empress. The Keth Dominion's delegation entered through the main floor's primary arch, and Empress Islara came last, which was protocol. The most senior figure always entered the room last so that all others were already seated, and the arrival carried its full weight. She was extraordinary. I had seen images of course, and the briefing documents had included a full biological summary, but images did not prepare you for the reality of her. She stood 3 m tall. Her 6 limbs moved with a precision that looked almost mechanical, except that there was something unmistakably graceful underneath it. Her exoskeletal surface was the deep blue green of ocean water seen from below, and it caught the light of the hall and gave it back in soft pulses, the resonance field around her. Every high-ranking Keth had won a harmonic halo that signaled their presence to other Keth, even across distances, was visible as a faint shimmer in the air. Above her head, she moved to her seat and settled into it with the composed certainty of someone who had been the most important being in every room she had ever entered. I watched her for a long moment. I noticed something. It was small. It was so small that I almost dismissed it as a trick of the light or my own unfamiliarity with Keth physiology. The secondary limbs, the smaller pair she kept folded against her thorax, moved twice in quick succession. Not a gesture, not a signal, just a small involuntary tremor, the kind your hand makes when your body is working harder than your face is showing. I had seen that tremor before. Not on an alien Empress, on my mother standing in our kitchen trying to tell me she was fine. While her hands shook at her sides, I pulled out my data pad and opened my notes. I watched the Empress for the rest of the Pretian period. The tremor came again 6 minutes later, then a small shift in her harmonic resonance, almost imperceptible, a slightly flattened tone in the lower register of her natural Frequency, her posture was perfect, her expression, as much as I could read Keth. Expression was composed, but her secondary limbs moved again and then went very still, as though she was now actively suppressing the movement. I looked at Sarah beside me, the Empress. I said quietly, "When did she arrive on station?" Sarah glanced at me. 3 days ago. What, has anything changed in her environment recently? New materials in the hall, new furnishings, anything decorative? Sarah's head tilted again. The conclave commissioned a cultural display for this session. Each member species contributed elements. The human delegation submitted a installation in the main hall. I believe it is derived from a plant found on your world, pine, I think the word is. I felt the cold settle in my stomach. Has the Empress spent time near that installation? She reviewed the display this morning as part of the formal welcome, approximately 40 minutes. Surrows. Adai Shun, why are you asking these questions? I did not answer immediately. I was looking at the Empress below. She had shifted slightly in her seat. Her resonance field had dimmed by a fraction that probably no one else in the room had registered. I had seen that dimming before too, not an alien physiology in a human face going pale. I knew what I was looking at. I was almost certain I knew, and if I was right, then the most powerful being in the galactic enclave was in serious trouble, and every medical professional around her was going to miss it entirely, because what was happening to her had been engineered out of KE biology 12,000 years ago. I stood up. I need to speak to someone in the Empress's medical team, I said. Sarah stared at me. That is not possible. The session is about to begin. Her medical team is not accessible during Sarah, I said. And I kept my voice very calm, because calm was the only useful thing I had in that moment. I think the Empress is having a reaction to the pine resin. I think her body is responding to it the way some human bodies respond to allergens. I think it's going to get much worse very quickly, and I think her own physicians are not going to recognize it, because KE medicine has not encountered this failure state in thousands of years. Sarah looked at me for a long moment. Her resonator hummed softly, which I had learned meant she was processing something that did not fit neatly into her existing categories. You are a diplomatic, a tease, she said finally. You're not a physician. No, I said. But I grew up watching my mother nearly die from this 3 times, and the 4th time I was the one who kept her alive until the medics arrived. The session bell rang below. The hall went quiet. The Empress sat perfectly still in her seat, composed and regal, and I was nearly certain in the early stages of something her body did not know how to handle, and her physicians did not know how to see. I looked at Sarah. Tell me you believe me, I said, or tell me you don't, but tell me now. Sarah did not answer immediately. Below us, the conclave session had begun. The presiding voice, a Fallery delegate, whose species communicated primarily through subsonic rumble, filtered through translation technology, and is something the hall could process, announced the opening of the 340th session. 43 species settled into their places. The air translation field hummed. Business, the business of the galaxy began to move forward, and I was watching the Empress's secondary limbs. There was again the tremor, faster this time, and now I could see what I had missed before, the slight change in the color along the joints of her Exoskeleton, key biology was not human biology, and I was not going to pretend. I understood it fully, but I understood enough. The joints were where the internal pressure showed first, where the body's effort to compensate for something going wrong became visible on the outside. Sarah, I said quietly, look at her secondary limbs, right now, watch them. Sarah looked, I waited, I counted 4 seconds. They're moving, Sarah said. Slowly. They're not supposed to move like that, are they? A pause. No, is a suppressed stress indicator. It should not be present during a formal session. In her resonance field, Sarah was quiet for a moment, then it has changed. By how much? Perhaps 3%, perhaps 4%. It is subtle. She turned to look at me, and her large amber eyes held something new in them, not belief exactly, but the crack in the wall that belief eventually comes through. What do you need? That was the question. What did I need? I needed to reach someone in the Empress's medical team before the session reached the point where interrupting it became politically catastrophic. I needed to explain a medical concept, immune hypersensitivity, to physicians who had never encountered it in a living patient. And I needed to do all of this from an observation gallery with no official standing. In the next few minutes, I need a direct communication line to the KE medical station on this level. I said, not a request through channels, a direct line. I can attempt to reach the deputy health attaché of the KE delegation. Do it now, please. While Sarah moved to the side of the gallery to make the call, I opened the notes on my data pad. I was not a physician. I want to be clear about that, because what came next has been described in ways that make me sound more qualified than I was. I was a diplomatic attese with a background in xenocultural studies and a childhood spent in close proximity to a woman whose immune system was, as she put it herself, creative in its approach to potential threats. My mother had a condition that made her body treat certain natural compounds as though they were invasions. She had spent years managing it. I had spent years helping her manage it and watching and learning the rhythm of it. I knew the early signs, the way you know the sound of a family member's footsteps, not from textbook study but from living with it. What I was seeing in the Empress fit the pattern, the trigger, the pine resin, something her body had no evolutionary framework for, would have entered her system during those 40 minutes in the welcome hall. The response would have been slow at first because Cathimmune systems were sophisticated and powerful, but sophisticated and powerful systems fail in dramatic ways when they encounter something genuinely outside their reference library. The cascade, once it started, would accelerate. I started writing down what I needed to communicate, simple terms, clear steps, nothing that require the listener to already know human medical history. Sarah returned. I have a deputy health attaché. She is willing to hear your concern. She has 40 seconds. 40 seconds. Right, I took the communicator. My name is Kaido Shun, human diplomatic attaché. I believe Empress Islara is experiencing an immune response to a compound in the pine resin display submitted by the human delegation. The response pattern in her secondary limbs and resonance field matches the early stage of what we call anaphylaxis, a condition where the immune system identifies a foreign substance as a threat and responds in a way that becomes self-damaging. The KT immune system is highly capable, which means The response may be stronger and faster than a less capable system would produce. She will appear fine until she is not fine, and the transition will be rapid. You should remove her from the hall, remove the resin from her proximity, and be prepared to suppress the immune cascade. I'm available to explain the mechanism in more detail. Silence on the line. Then the Empress is not displaying any distress indicators on our monitoring equipment. Your monitoring equipment is looking for threats you know about. I said this is a threat you don't know about. It will show up on your equipment when it has already become a crisis. Another silence. Longer. Who authorized you to access this communication line? My liaison, Sarah of the K Diplomatic Corps. I am telling you this because I believe it is true and because I think you are the right person to hear it. What you do with it is your decision. The line went quiet. Sarah gave me a look that I could not fully translate. I handed the communicator back and turned to the window below. The session continued. Salary presiding voice was introducing the first agenda item. 43 species were listening with the patience of civilizations that have been doing this for centuries. The Empress sat in her chair. Her secondary limbs moved again, and this time 2 members of her own delegation seated beside her noticed. I saw them turn a look at her. I saw the small conference between them, heads close together, harmonics exchanged too quietly for me to read from this distance. And then I saw the Empress herself turned slightly, not much, just enough to say something to the delegate on her right. Whatever she said, it made the delegate stand up immediately, but it was already too late to be quiet about it. The Empress's resonance field collapsed, not gradually, not in the slow dimming I had been watching for the last 40 minutes. It went from diminished to gone in the space of 3 seconds, and in the hall below, every present felt it simultaneously. I could tell by the way their heads all turned at once, as though pulled by a string. A resonance field was not just a signal of rank. It was for K, a fundamental biological expression. Losing it was the equivalent of a human going cold and pale and glassy-eyed. Every Kef in that room knew something was wrong before any instrument confirmed it. The Empress rose from her seat. She was trying to stand. You could see the effort in it, the way each limb placed itself with a care that had not been there 20 minutes ago. She was compensating. She was doing exactly what my mother used to do, try to hold the line with sheer while her body worked against her. She made it 2 steps from her seat, then her legs folded. It was not a dramatic fall. It was almost quiet in the way that the worst moments often are. Her body simply stopped holding itself upright, and the 4 primary limbs that had carried her across 400 star systems of empire went out from under her, and she went down onto the floor of the conclave hall with a sound that echoed all the way up to where I stood. The hall erupted. I was already moving. The gallery door, the corridor, the elevator that was not moving fast enough. I took the stairs. 4 flights. I could hear the alarms by the 3rd flight, the station's emergency system cycling up, the automated voice in 7 languages announcing a medical event on the primary floor. The doors at the bottom of the stairwell require my access badge, and I have never been more grateful for the 6 weeks of preparation that had at least gotten me that far. I came through the side entrance of the main hall just as the Empress's medical team reached her. There were 3 of them, KE physicians, each one carrying equipment that probably represented the finest medical technology in this part of the galaxy. They were fast, organized, and working from a playbook that had served the Keth Dominion for 12,000 years. They were also about to make her condition significantly worse. The lead physician was preparing an electroneural stimulant. I knew what it was from the briefing documents, a standard KE intervention for systemic shock designed to reinforce neural cascade stability. For most cath medical emergencies, it was the correct first move. For an immune hypersensitivity reaction, it was the wrong move. The stimulant would accelerate the very system that was attacking her. I crossed the hall floor at a run. A V-Throny security officer stepped into my path. He was 3 times my width, and his arm came out to block me with the casual certainty of someone who had never encountered an obstacle that weighed less than 300 kg. I did not fight him. I had the sense to know that fighting a V-Throny soldier was not a viable strategy for a human being who needed to cross a room in the next 15 seconds. Instead, I dropped completely. Instantly, I went limp from the knees down, and my full weight dropped straight through his grip, because his grip was calibrated for beings with skeletal leverage, beings whose mass resisted being redirected. My mass simply surrendered to gravity, and he was holding empty air while I was already on the floor, rolling sideways and back on my feet before his hands had finished closing on nothing. 2 seconds. I had lost maybe 2 seconds. I covered the remaining distance at a dead run and reached the medical team just as the lead physician activated the stimulant device. Stop, I said. They ignored me. I was a small, soft creature from a new member species, and they were in the middle of a crisis, and nothing in their experience suggested they should stop for me, so I stepped in front of the device. The lead physician looked at me. Her eyes were large and faceted, and they held, in that moment, the very specific expression of a professional whose emergency procedure has just been interrupted by something that should not be here. Move, she said through the translation collar. You need to hear me first. I said 30 seconds. Give me 30 seconds, and if I am wrong, you can move me yourself. She stared at me. Behind me, a crowd was gathering, delegates from 43 species, security personnel, staff, the full weight of the galactic conclave standing in a ring around one human being, blocking the path of the most advanced medical team in this sector of space. 30 seconds, I said again, and the lead physician, whose name I later learned was Physician Verithnes, whose family had served Keth medicine for 9 generations, who had treated 17 heads of state in her career and had never once been interrupted by a diplomatic a tease from a primitive new member world, looked at me for a full 3 seconds. Then she said, "Speak." I spoke. What is happening to her is not a standard neurological cascade failure. Her immune system has encountered compound. It has never evolved a response to a resin derived from a plant on my world. The compound is not toxic in the conventional sense. Her immune system is not responding to poison. It is responding to something unfamiliar by treating it as an enemy. The response itself is what is causing the collapse. The technical term in human medicine is anaphylaxis. The neural stimulant you're about to use will amplify the immune response and accelerate the process. The Correct intervention is the opposite. You need to suppress the immune cascade, not stimulate the system that is running the cascade, and you need to put distance between her and the resin. Silence, the physician's head tilted. Not the polite confusion of Sarah's gesture, something harder, something that was working. Immune hypersensitivity, she said. It came out as a question and a statement at the same time. Yes, that condition was eliminated from KE biology in the pre-conclave period. I know, I said, but you're treating a living patient, not a historical record, and she is getting worse. Very looked down at the Empress. She looked at her instruments, then she set down the stimulant device. Clear the hall, she said to her team. All synthetic resins in this room. Quarantine. Now she turned back to me. Tell me exactly what the immune cascade requires to halt. I told her. I spoke in plain terms, in simple steps, in the only language I had for something this urgent. The physician listened with the complete attention of someone who has put her assumptions down and picked up a new framework in the space of 45 seconds. She asked 2 questions, sharp, precise questions that told me she was not just listening, she was already translating what I said into Keth biology, finding the analog mechanisms, identifying the tools she had that could do the work I was describing. 2 minutes later, the Empress received the correct intervention. 4 minutes after that, her resonance field returned, faint at first, then stronger, pulsing in slow waves like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. The hall was silent. I sat down on the floor of the galactic conclave in the middle of the most powerful diplomatic gathering in this region of space, because my legs had simply decided they were done holding me up. My hands were shaking. My heart rate was doing something that no doctor would have approved of. The floor was cold from my jacket. Physician Verithness looked down at me from her considerable height. The intervention is working, she said. Good. I said. You were correct. I know. I said. I was hoping I wasn't. Across the hall, I could see Commander D. Vash of the VTHRONI Council standing very still, with the expression of a person whose categories have just been rearranged without his permission. Around him, delegates from 43 species were doing the same, and then from the treatment area, where her team was working from the direction of the Empress herself, a sound came, a harmonic chord, single, clear, resonating through the hall in a frequency that made the translation field shiver with the effort of rendering it. Sarah appeared at my side. Her voice was quiet. She said, your name. Sarah said. I looked up. She has said it twice. Sarah added, the Empress does not repeat herself. I sat on the cold floor of Verithal, and I thought about my mother standing in our kitchen, shaking hands at her sides, telling me she was fine. I thought about the 12-year-old version of myself who had been so scared and so angry at the thing that kept trying to take her away. I thought about how fear, when you live with it long enough, becomes knowledge. Tell her I said that my mother would be glad to know it was useful. They let me see her the following morning. I want to say that sentence slowly because people often rush past it when they tell this story later. They let me see her, Empress of the K Dominion, ruler of 400 star systems, the most senior figure in the galactic conclave. She requested a meeting with a human diplomatic ATs who had sat down on the floor of the main hall because his legs gave out. She did not send a functionary. She did not communicate through the formal channels. She sent Verathanes to find me personally, and the physician delivered the message with a careful phrasing of someone who had been given exact words to use and intended to use them. Precisely, the Emperor would like to speak with the human who noticed what no one else did. That was the phrase, the human who noticed what no one else did. I spent that morning trying to understand what had happened because the night before had been a blur of station medical teams, debriefings from the KA diplomatic corps, a very long conversation with Ambassador Finlay, who managed to be both furious and relieved in equal measure, and a 4-hour sleep that felt like falling off a cliff. By the time Veronese came to my quarters, I had eaten, showered, and done my best to look like someone who belonged in the same room as an empress. The meeting was held not in the formal receiving chamber, but in a smaller room off the medical wing, still aboard Verathal, still entirely unlike anything built with human proportions in mind, but quieter than the main diplomatic areas. The furniture was keist, which meant I sat on a surface designed for being twice my height, and my feet did not reach the floor. I made a conscious decision not to let this bother me. Empress Islara was seated when I entered. She looked different from this distance. The resonance field was back to its full presence, the shimmer in the air above her head pulsing with a steadiness that I had not seen the day before, but she looked like someone who had been old recently, not weakened. Exactly, the KTH did not do weakened, but there was a quality of recent effort in her stillness, the way a person who's been holding themselves together finally allows the room to hold some of the weight. She looked at me for a long moment before she spoke. Through the translation collar, her voice arrived as something close to musical, layered harmonics rendered into words the way symphony might sound if it decided to form sentences. Sit, she said. I was already sitting technically, but I straightened up. You were smaller than I expected, she said. I had not seen a human at this proximity before. We are easy to underestimate, I said. Sarah, standing at the edge of the room, made a small sound that might have been concern, but the Empress made no response that suggested offense. She studied me in the way I had seen scientists study something they are reassessing, not unkindly, but with the full weight of a highly developed intellect deciding what category to place something in. Physician Verathanes tells me that you interrupted her medical procedure. She said I did. She also tells me that if you had not done so, the treatment she was about to apply would have, as you described it, accelerated the process. That is correct. You understood this from observing my secondary limbs in your resonance field, I said. The dimming and the pattern of suppression in your limbs, the way you were holding them. Still, after the tremor, I recognized the effort. She was quiet for a moment. Explain to me, she said, how a human being came to recognize a KE medical condition that KE physicians did not recognize. I thought about how to answer that honestly. I did not recognize a KE medical condition, I said. I recognized the behavior of something trying not to show that it is struggling. That behavior looks similar across a lot of different biologies, I think, and I recognized a specific kind of struggle because I had watched it in someone I was very close to. I told her about my mother, not the full history. We did not have time for that, and it was not the kind of story that suited a formal meeting, but enough the briefing, our word for it, which Sarah translated helpfully as essential. Information given rapidly, the 3 incidents before the one where I had intervened the way I had learned what to watch for, because watching was all I had been able to do for a long time. The Empress listened. The Keth approach to listening was different from human listening. They went very still. The resonance field held steady. Nothing moved. It was at first unsettling. The way a room going quiet can be unsettling. Then I realized it was a form of complete attention. They gave you the absence of distraction as a gift. When I finished, she said, "Your species is vulnerable to microscopic biological threats. Yes, your bones fracture under sufficient impact. Yes, your skin tears also. Yes, your atmospheric requirements are narrow. Your temperature tolerance is limited. Your lifespan is by conclave standards very brief." I had heard this list before, in various forms from various sources, sometimes meant unkindly and sometimes meant as something close to pity. Coming from her, it was neither. It was an inventory. She was counting the things that could have been weaknesses and trying to understand why they had produced something unexpected instead. "All of that is true," I said. "We are very easy to damage. We break in a lot of ways." "And yet," she said, "and yet I agreed." There was a pause. "My physicians have been using KE medicine for a very long time," she said. "They're among the finest in the Dominion. They have access to knowledge accumulated over 30,000 years, and none of them recognized what was happening to me. They knew everything that had ever threatened Keth." I said, "This had not. It was outside their library." She tilted her head, not the way Sarah did, not confused, but something more deliberate. "Processing. You had a library for it," she said. "I had a memory for it," I said, "which is different. Libraries are organized. Memories are just things that stayed." She looked at me for a long time. "I would like to understand something," she said. "The Vithron emotion currently before the conclave argues that your species is too limited to hold full member status, that your fragility makes you unsuitable for participation in decisions that will shape civilizations for centuries." I said nothing. I waited. Commander D. Vash's argument rests on a specific definition of capability. She said he measures what a species can withstand, what can do under force, what it can survive without assistance. By those measures, your species ranks at the lower end of conclave membership. "Yes," I said, "I would like to offer you a different measure." She said, "What a species notices." The resonance field around her shifted, a deepening of tone, a settling. I did not know enough about Keth harmonics to read it precisely, but Sarah had gone very still at the edge of the room, and I took that as a signal that something significant had just been said. "What a species notices," I repeated. "Every species in the conclave has spent its evolutionary history becoming capable of withstanding more stronger armor, greater resistance, more powerful immune systems. We have optimized ourselves for endurance." She paused. "In doing so, we have optimized ourselves to stop paying attention to things we no longer need to fear." My species removed immune hypersensitivity from our genome because we had solved it. We placed it in the past, and so none of my physicians, who are highly capable people, were watching for it. "You were watching for threats you knew about," I said. "Yes, and you were watching for something else entirely. You were watching for the signs of something going wrong in a system you did not fully understand, because that is the condition your species lives in. Constantly she let that settle. You have spent your entire evolutionary history in a state of biological uncertainty, she said. You cannot be certain that the environment is safe. You cannot be certain that your body will handle what it encounters. You have no certainty at all by the standards of most conclave species, and so you develop something we did not. The habit of watching very carefully for the first signs that something is about to go wrong. I sat there in a chair that was too large for me in a room built for beings twice my size in a station orbiting a neutron star 14 light years from Earth, and I felt something shift in my chest that I did not have an immediate word for fragility as education. I said, yes. She said, that is exactly the phrase. We were quiet together for a moment, then she said, I have spoken with physician Verithnist. This morning she has formally requested a xenobiological ical exchange program with Earth's medical institutions, specifically focused on immune-related research. I imagine it will be welcomed. I said, I have also spoken with the conclave presiding committee, she said. The session will resume tomorrow. I intend to speak before the vote on the V-Throne motion. She did not tell me what she intended to say. She did not need to. I got down from the too large chair. It took a small, undignified hop which I chose not to acknowledge, and I stood before her. She looked down at me from her full height, the resonance field pulsing gently above her. One more question, she said. Of course, yesterday, when the security officer stopped you, what did you do? I went limp. I said, I dropped straight down. His grip was designed for a body that resisted being moved. I removed the resistance. She looked at me for a long moment. That, she said, is a remarkable approach to a much larger obstacle. It works better than fighting, I said. Usually the corner of what might have been an expression crossed her face. Yes, she said, I imagine it does. The session resumed the following morning, and I watched from the gallery. Ambassador Finley was seated at the primary diplomatic tier, already a change, because at the last session the human delegation had been in secondary observation seating. Finley was composed and excellent at not showing how surprised she was by things. She showed it slightly now in the set of her shoulders, the way she kept her eyes forward while absorbing the shift in the room. The room had shifted. I had felt it the previous day walking the corridors of Verithal, and I felt it more clearly now. It was not visible in any obvious way. No one had changed their posture dramatically or rearranged their seating. But attention is a physical thing when 43 species are all pointing it in the same direction, and for the first time since I had arrived on the station, some of that attention was pointed at the human delegation, and it was not dismissal. Vash was present. He sat with the V-Throne block, his large, armored body folding into the specially designed seating with the ease of someone who had always fit perfectly into every space built for this conclave. He had not changed his posture either, but he was looking at the human section of the gallery, and when his gaze passed across the gallery window where I was standing, he held it for a moment before moving on. I did not look away. The presiding voice called the session to order. The first order business was a brief medical announcement. The Empress had given formal permission for this, noting that a biological incident had occurred and had been addressed, and that a review of environmental materials used in conclave. Displays would be conducted before the next session. The announcement was phrased in the careful neutral language that official bodies use when they want to communicate that something serious happened without triggering further disruption. Then the agenda moved to the Vithrana motion. Devash rose to speak. He was a skilled speaker. I want to be honest about this because the easier version of this story makes him a simple obstacle, a straightforward villain, and he was not that. He was a person with a coherent argument based on a specific understanding of what capability meant. He spoke about the responsibilities of the conclave, about the history of protected ward classifications, about the genuine complexity of including young species in decisions that would affect civilizations for generations. He spoke without particular emotion. He spoke with the authority of someone who believed what he was saying. He spoke for 9 minutes. Then the Empress rose. The hall did something I had not witnessed before. It did not simply go quiet, it went completely still. Kind of stillness that is not the absence of sound so much as the presence of total attention. 43 species all orienting toward one point in the room. She spoke for 4 minutes. Her words, filtered through the translation field, arrived as something both clear and layered, the way music sometimes holds more meaning than the notes themselves. She did not argue against Devash directly. She did not rebut his points. One by one, she simply told the conclave what had happened, not as a dramatic story, as a factual account. She described what she had experienced, what her physicians had done, and what a human diplomatic attache had done that her physicians had not. Then she said something that the translation field rendered into several different versions simultaneously, because it was the kind of statement that means different things depending on which language receives it. What I heard in English was this: we have spent 10,000 years becoming harder to damage. In doing so, we have become less able to notice damage coming. The species sitting in our gallery has spent the same 10,000 years unable to stop being damaged. They have therefore become extraordinarily good at noticing it. She sat down. The hall was quiet for 3 seconds. In a room with 43 species, 3 seconds of silence is a very long time. Then the translation hum began again. The low background sound of every species simultaneously processing what they had heard and discussing it with their neighbors. The sound of the galaxy updating its understanding of something. The vote on the Vithrone motion was called. It failed by a margin that surprised almost everyone, including, I think, Devash himself. In the gallery above, I sat very still and felt the particular exhaustion that comes after something you have been afraid of turns out differently than you feared. So, Buidma, the motion failed, she said. I know. The Empress moved the human delegation to primary tier seating. Before the session began, that was not procedural, that was a statement. I know that too. She was quiet for a moment. You knew when you stood up in the gallery yesterday that the vote was 48 hours away. Yes, and you stood up anyway. She was getting worse, I said. The timing of the vote was not really relevant. Sarah was quiet for a moment longer. Then she said something that she delivered with the precision of someone choosing their words carefully, because she was Keith and the Keth did not speak carelessly. I called you the human who noticed, she said, in my report to the delegation yesterday. I used that Phrase I heard, I want you to know that. I mean it as the highest designation I know how to give, she said in Cath. Culture, we have a term for beings who perceive what others cannot. It refers to someone whose perspective is essential because they see from a position that no one else occupies. She told me the word inketh harmonic. I cannot reproduce it in writing. The translation collar rendered it approximately as seer of the necessary. Thank you, I said. You are remarkably calm for someone who has just altered the political status of their entire species, she said. I looked out the window at the floor of the conclave, below where the session was moving on to the next agenda item, the business of the galaxy continuing as it always did. My hand stopped shaking about an hour ago. I said, I am working on calm. She made the small sound that I had come to understand was key. Laughter. That afternoon, I had a conversation I had not expected. Devash found me in one of the station's smaller transit corridors, the kind of place where beings go when they want a conversation that is not part of the official record. He was not accompanied by security, neither was I. It was just the two of us in a corridor built for Vethroni proportions, which meant I was once again the smallest being in a space designed for someone else. He did not say anything for a moment. He looked at me with the careful assessment of a tactician who has encountered an unexpected variable and is still working out its implications. The motion failed, he said. Yes, I said. You understand that my concerns about your species were not personal. I understand that. I said your concerns were structural. You had a definition of capability, and by that definition, we did not qualify. He was quiet for a moment. Physician Veronese's report on the incident was distributed to all delegation heads this morning. I read it. I see. She described a chain of observation that she characterizes as he paused as though finding the right phrasing unusual in its source. I imagine it was. He looked at me directly. The Vethroni face was not built for the range of expressions that human faces produced, but there was something in his eyes which were large and amber colored and very steady that I read as genuine inquiry. How did you know? He asked. Not the medical knowledge. The medical knowledge is a detail. How did you know something was wrong before any instrument detected it? I thought about this. My species is not well defended. I said, we have known this for a long time. We cannot outfight most threats. We cannot outrun most threats. We cannot outlast most threats physically. So we developed a different strategy. We pay attention. We watch for the small things, the slight change in a pattern, the detail that does not fit, the thing that is almost right but not quite. We do this because if we miss it, we do not usually get a second chance. He was quiet. Commander Ravish, I said, your species became very capable of withstanding threats. My species became very capable of noticing them. Those are different kinds of capability. He stood there for a long moment. A Vethronian silence is not a comfortable presence. The sheer mass of them, the physical weight of their attention, is something you feel in the air around you. Then he said, I may have been using the wrong measure. For Vethrani, that sentence is an enormous thing to say. I understood that. I accepted it in the spirit it was offered. I appreciate that, I said. He turned and walked away. He did not apologize. He did not retract the motion formally because it had already failed. In the formal record was what it was. But he had said what he said, and in the political vocabulary of the conclave, it was more significant than it might seem to someone unfamiliar with how rarely the VTHRoni acknowledged being wrong about anything. I stood in the corridor for a moment after he left, then I went back to my quarters and wrote my report. The report to Earth was a formal document. I want to be honest about this, too, because there is a version of this story where I wrote something eloquent and moving that changed the way the diplomatic corps thought about humanity's role in the galaxy. What I actually wrote was a 12-page report in standard diplomatic format with appendices covering the medical incident, the response from the KET delegation, the outcome of the Vithroni motion, and recommendations for the review of cultural display materials used in future conclave sessions. It was a thorough report. It was not poetry, but in the footnotes which formal documents allow, and which no one above a thesis level ever actually reads. I wrote something different. I wrote about what the Empress had said about fragility as education, about the 10,000 years my species had spent unable to stop being damaged and what that had produced in us. I wrote about my mother's kitchen and the 12-year-old who had learned to watch very carefully because watching was the only tool available. I wrote that I thought there was something in the human experience of vulnerability that was not a deficit to be apologized for, but a perspective that the galaxy perhaps needed someone to hold. I wrote it in the footnotes because I was not sure anyone should have to read it if they did not want to, but I want it on the record somewhere. 2 weeks later, I received a response from Deputy Secretary Holloway. It was brief. It said, "Your report has been reviewed regarding your footnotes. They have been separately forwarded to the Cultural Strategy Division. Well done, Adisha Shan." That was all. It was enough. On my last morning aboard Verithal before transfer to my next posting, I went to the observation deck. The station had a viewing platform on its outer ring, a long curved corridor with a transparent wall giving a direct view of open space. The neutron star HR 7219 was visible to the left, small and brilliant and terrifying, a collapsed remnant spinning so fast that it was difficult to look at directly. Around it, the station turned slowly, its rings catching the light in thin arcs. I stood there for a long time. I was still the smallest, softest, shortest-lived person who had stood in this spot, almost certainly. I still had no armor plating, no venom glands, no secondary eyelids, no echolocation. I still required a narrow range of atmospheric conditions and broke in a remarkable number of ways. When those conditions were not met, none of that had changed, but the Empress had said my name twice, and in the vocabulary of the K, whose civilization had existed for 30,000 years, whose Empress had spoken before the conclave without repeating herself in recent memory. Saying a name twice was the nearest thing they had to saying, "You matter." Sarah came to find me before my transport. She stood beside me at the viewing window, both of us looking out at the same stars. The KET Medical Institute has formally submitted requests to Earth's Interplanetary Health Organization. She said they want a joint research program on immune adaptation in biological systems specifically. And here she paused, choosing the phrasing with care, the mechanisms by which species that cannot eliminate vulnerability. learn to live productively. Alongside it, that is a very elegant way to describe what humans do, I said. Empress chose the wording herself, Sarah said. I nodded slowly. There is something else, Sarah said. I waited. The Vithrani Council has submitted an unusual request to the conclave's member relations office. They have asked that the human delegation consider providing observers for long-range diplomatic missions in contested border regions. She paused. The request specifies, and I want to be precise here, beings with high perceptual sensitivity to environmental change and early stage system instability. I turned to look at her. They want humans, I said. They want humans, she confirmed, not as security, not as military support, as the beings most likely to notice that something is about to go wrong. I looked back out at the stars. My mother would find that very funny, I said. Why? Because she spent 30 years apologizing to doctors for having a body that overreacted to everything, I said, and now apparently the trait runs in the family, and it is a qualifying skill for interstellar diplomatic missions. Sarah made the small sound that was key. They still call us Frail, I said. Out there in the corridor, talk in the official assessments is still the first word. Yes, she said, we have decided to take it as a compliment. I said. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think that is in fact the most capable thing I have ever heard any species do. My transport was called 20 minutes later. I picked up my bag. I said goodbye to Sarah, who delivered it with the formal parting tone that translates approximately as, go well and notice everything. I walked through the corridors of Verithal for the last time on this posting, past the tall and the armored and the ancient and the powerful, and not one of them looked down at me with dismissal anymore. Some looked with curiosity, some with something that might have been respect. Dravash's deputy, passing me in corridor 7, gave me the Vethroni equivalent of a nod, a slight lowering of the secondary head crest. That meant in their culture acknowledgement of something significant. I did not have armor. I did not have venom. I did not have the lifespan or the size or the physical capability of anyone else on that station. I had what I had always had. I paid attention, and in a galaxy full of species who had spent 10,000 years becoming harder to damage, it turned out that someone who had spent 10,000 years learning to notice damage coming was worth quite a lot. I boarded my transport and sat down in a seat built for human proportions for the first time in 4 months, and the relief of that was so complete that I sat there for several minutes doing nothing at all. Then I opened my data pad. I had a new assignment briefing to read. I started with the footnotes.